What if the most famous sufferer in history never actually existed? That is not a skeptic's question. That is the question the book of Job itself forces you to ask if you actually read it. Because if Job was a real person who lived a real life, then his story is one thing. But if the text is something else, something far stranger, then everything you were told about patience and suffering might be missing the actual point. Today, we are going to do something most churches never do. We are going to treat the book of Job like evidence. Look at what it actually says, where it says it, what kind of book it is, and why the answer to that question changes what this book was always arguing. Before we go in, I want to say something for a second. We just hit 1,000 subscribers, and I genuinely mean it when I say that would not have happened without the people who watch, share, comment, and keep coming back. You keep showing up. That is what keeps me making this. Thank you. Now let's get into it. Meet Nadia. She is 26 years old. Her mother died 18 months ago. And in the weeks after the funeral, someone at her church handed her a Bible and said, "Read Job, it will help." So she read it. All 42 chapters, she came back with a question no one in her church could answer. Why, she said, does God sound like he is bragging in chapter 1? Most people who have read Job were told it is a story about patience. They were told Job suffered, stayed faithful, and got everything back. Lesson learned, but Nadia read the actual text. And the actual text has God pointing Job out to a divine assembly and saying, "Have you considered my servant Job? God started it, not the devil, God." That detail sits at the center of a question scholars and theologians have been fighting over for centuries. Was Job a real historical person, or is this book a piece of sophisticated philosophical drama? Two views, both taken seriously by serious people. View A says Job was real, a historical man from a specific place mentioned by name in the prophecies of Ezekiel, held up by James in the New Testament as an example of genuine perseverance. His story was passed down, eventually written, and given to us as testimony. View B says the book of Job is wisdom theater, that the story uses the framework of a real person or a real archetype to build a radical philosophical argument about suffering, divine justice, and the nature of righteousness itself. That the Hebrew poetry is far too stylized to be spontaneous speech. That the celestial wager in chapter 1 is literary architecture, not a transcript of a meeting. Both views have problems. Both views have evidence. And that tension, honestly, is exactly what makes this book one of the strangest and most honest things ever written. Here is the map. We are going to look at the evidence for historicity first. Then we are going to look at why the structure of the book itself resists a flat biographical reading. And then, and this is the part almost no one covers, we are going to look at what the ending of Job actually reveals about what this book was always about. Because the ending is not what you think it is. The first piece of evidence for a historical Job is geography. The text says he lived in the land of Uz. That sounds vague, but Uz was not an invented name. Lamentations 4:21 places the daughter of Edom in the land of Uz. Genesis 10:23 lists Uz as a descendant of Aram. And in 2023, an Assyriologist named K.L. Younger identified what may be a reference to the city and land of Usi in northern Syria in a copy of Esarhaddon's succession treaty found at Tel Tayanat. Before we go further, if you are getting something out of this investigation, hit subscribe and the notification bell. We just crossed 1,000, and most of the people watching right now are not subscribed yet. 2 seconds, and you will actually see the next one when it drops. Hit like while you are there, and share this to someone who has ever wrestled with this book. Uz appeared in a real political document. Ancient authors who invented settings did not give them names that corresponded to actual treaty territories. The second piece of evidence is the intertextual witness. In Ezekiel 14:14, the prophet brackets Job with Noah and Daniel as paradigms of righteousness. He says that even if these three men were in the land, they could only save themselves by their own righteousness. That argument only works if the audience believed Job was real. An illustration from a fictional character carries no rhetorical weight. You do not tell a grieving nation, even Gandalf could not save you. You name real people, which is what Ezekiel does. And Ezekiel was not a careless writer. The third piece of evidence is the cultural detail. Job's wealth is measured in livestock, not gold. He offers sacrifices himself instead of going to a temple or priest. His daughters receive a full inheritance. These details are consistent with the patriarchal period, roughly 2,000 years before Christ, before the Mosaic Law, before the monarchy, before the temple system. That level of accuracy does not appear by accident in invented stories, so the historical case is real. Job was either a real person or a figure with such strong historical memory that Ezekiel, James, and the earliest church treated him as one. But here is where it gets complicated, because the book of Job is one of the most structurally unusual texts in the entire Bible. And that structure is doing something biography does not do. The book opens and closes in prose, but the vast middle, chapters 3 through 42, is almost entirely Hebrew poetry. Highly stylized, metrically complex, ancient Hebrew poetry. Nobody speaks in ancient metered verse when they are in pain, even in the ancient world. The moment you reach chapter 3 and Job curses the day of his birth, you are not reading a transcript. You are reading an author who took real events and shaped them into something designed to be wrestled with. This does not mean Job was invented. It means the author of the book was doing what poets do, taking history and turning it into an argument. The philosopher Horace Kallan in 1918 called this Hebrew wisdom, theater, noting that the book follows something structurally close to Greek tragedy, a protagonist, a crisis, a series of exchanges where the protagonist's position hardens while the opposition weakens, a climax, a reversal. Most biblical scholars reject a direct Greek influence, but they do not reject the observation because the architecture is there. And I know what some of you are thinking right now. Are you saying it is just a story? No, I am saying it is more than a story. Real suffering used as the foundation for one of the most radical theological arguments ever written. That is not less than biography. It is more. Think of it this way. The Gospels are historical, but they are also deliberately shaped narratives. Eyewitness accounts, given literary form. Nobody reads John's prologue as a transcript of what someone said standing at a doorway. But nobody calls John's Gospel fiction. The book of Job is operating in the same space, and the proof of that is in what it actually argues, not just what it describes. Which brings us to the detail your Bible probably softened without telling you. In chapter 1, verse 6, the text says, "The sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Hasatan also came among them." That phrase, Hasatan, is not a proper name in the original Hebrew. Ha is the definite article. The Hasatan means the accuser. The same way you might say the prosecutor or the auditor. A title, an office, a function within a divine legal council. In every English Bible you have read, this word was translated as a proper name, Satan, and the entire weight of the scene shifted, because Satan brings 2,000 years of Christian imagery. The fallen angel, the enemy of God, the figure with horns. But Hasatan in Job is not rebelling against anything. He is not the devil of Revelation. He is doing his job. He is roaming the earth, explicitly authorized to do so, and he shows up in the divine council to file a report. His challenge is a legal one, not a physical one. He says, Job is only righteous because God protects him. Remove the protection, and Job will curse God to his face. This is a deposition, a wager, a legal test, with a real human being as the evidence. And God says, go ahead. That detail is why the book of Job is not a simple story about patience. God opened Job's file. God pointed him out. God authorized the suffering for anyone who has ever prayed and felt nothing in return, for anyone who has ever watched something devastating happen to someone who did not deserve it. That detail is not easy to sit with, and the book does not let you off the hook. It makes you sit with it for 40 chapters. Actually, let me pause here for a second. Everything I just walked through, the archaeology, the treaty texts, the Hebrew titles, the structure of the divine council, it is all in the research document I put together for this video on my Patreon, free to access. The research document has citations and links so you can go deeper yourself. And if you want to actually talk about this with people who take it as seriously as you do, there is a live group chat on the examined tier where we dig into exactly this kind of thing. The first 10 people to join any paid tier are OG members, and I will shout them out in the next video. Link is in the description. Now, back to the book, because we need to talk about what was happening in the ancient world around this question. Job was not the first person to write about this problem. There is a Babylonian text called Ludla Beil Nemechi, sometimes called the Babylonian Job, that tells the story of a righteous man named Shubsi who loses everything. Health, status, family. He cries out, he waits, and eventually the god Marduk restores him. On the surface, it sounds like the same story, but the Babylonian text ends differently. Shubsi ultimately concludes that he must have sinned somewhere without knowing it. The suffering happened because he did something wrong. He just could not figure out what. That is the framework Job's three friends use. They tell him for 32 chapters, "You must have sinned. This would not be happening to you otherwise." The book of Job is specifically written to reject that framework. Not to say God is arbitrary or indifferent, but to say that the equation suffering equals punishment is false. That the universe is not a vending machine where righteousness produces protection and sin produces pain. Job's friends are not villains, they are theologians. They are applying the standard moral logic of their world, and God, at the end, calls them wrong. He does not call them wrong gently. He says to Eliphaz, "My anger burns against you and your two friends, because you have not spoken of me what is right. As my servant Job has," Job, who spent 40 chapters arguing with God, demanding a hearing, accusing heaven of injustice, is vindicated. His three friends, who defended God politely, are told to go ask Job to pray for them. The man who was angry at God was right, the men who defended God were wrong. And then the whirlwind speaks. God's response in chapters 38 to 41 is one of the most unusual answers ever recorded. Job has been demanding a legal hearing, a direct explanation. He wants God to tell him what he did wrong and why this is happening. God's response does not answer any of those questions. Instead, he asks Job a series of questions about creation. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Have you ever commanded the morning? Do you know where the gates of death are? Can you bind the Pleiades? On first read, this sounds like God is shutting Job down with his own power. You are small, I am big. Stop asking. But that reading misses what God is actually pointing at. He is not saying be quiet. He is showing Job a world of uncontrollable, terrifying, beautiful complexity and asking him whether he truly understood what he was living inside of. Then God points at two creatures, Behemoth and Leviathan. Scholars debate whether these are hippopotamuses and crocodiles or something else entirely. In ancient Near Eastern cosmology, Leviathan is a chaos monster, a symbol of the primordial forces of disorder that exist at the edge of the created world. God does not say, "Do not worry about Leviathan." He says, "Can you put a hook in Leviathan's nose? Will he make a covenant with you? Can you make him a pet?" No, Job cannot, but God can. The point is not that God is remote. The point is that the chaotic forces Job experienced, the forces that destroyed his life, are not outside of God's management. They are on a leash. A leash Job cannot see from where he is standing. And Job, after the whirlwind, does not get the answer he demanded. He says, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." And he stops. Not because he got an explanation, because the encounter itself changed him. And then, this is the part almost no one covers. If you have made it this far, this is what I actually made this video to say. After Job's restoration, he has 7 sons and 3 daughters. The sons are not named, the daughters are named Jemimah, Keziah, and then the text does something that was, in the ancient world, not legally permitted. Job gives his daughters a full inheritance alongside their brothers. This was not normal. This was not allowed. Daughters could only inherit when there were no male heirs. Job had 7 sons. His daughters had no legal claim to anything, and Job gave it to them anyway. Why does that matter? Because for 35 chapters, Job had been trapped inside what scholars call the retribution principle, the idea that life is a system of rewards and punishments, that your circumstances measure your worth. He had been judged by that system, falsely, and it nearly destroyed him. If this kind of depth is useful to you, I want to know where you are landing on this. Drop a comment below. I genuinely read every one. Share this to someone who has wrestled with Job or been through something they could not explain. That is the single most useful thing you can do to help this channel reach more people. After the whirlwind, he did not just get his stuff back. He came back as a different person. A person who refused to let his daughters be measured by a system that had once falsely measured him. He gave them names which in the ancient world meant seeing them as individuals, not property. Jemimah means dove. Keziah is a fragrance. Karanhapach means horn of adornment. And he gave them wealth, which in the ancient world meant giving them a future that did not depend on a husband, or a brother, or a system that could take everything overnight. The book of Job begins with a man who had everything and lost it all because of a wager he did not know was happening. It ends with a man who had everything back and used it to subvert the exact system that had once destroyed him. That is not a story about patience. That is a story about what suffering produces in the people who survive it, with their integrity intact, and what they do with that survival. So, was Job a real person? I think the evidence suggests yes, or close enough that the distinction barely matters. Was the book of Job written as wisdom theater? Also, yes, because real history and theological argument have never been enemies. They have been sharing a page since the first word of Genesis. The question is not whether Job existed. The question is whether you are reading the book he left behind, or just the patience lesson someone handed you. If this opens something up for you, there is another video linked right here that I think you will find just as valuable. Hit subscribe and the notification bell if you have not already, and share this to someone who has sat with Job or needs to like it while you are there. Thank you genuinely for being here.